Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. We have a great show today. We're going to be talking about how boards can oversee tech innovations and expenditures. And joining me are two people that are very integrated into the tech world. And first to my far right is Michele Trogni. Is that right? Trogni.
Right.
Who's the non-executive director with Deutsche Bank. She also sits on the board of Morneau, Shepell Inc., which I believe is in Canada, correct?
Correct, yes.
And is also the operating partner with Eldridge Industries. So welcome, Michele.
Thank you.
And to my immediate right is Gary Hoberman, who's the founder and CEO of Uncork Inc., and formerly the executive vice president and CIO for a small company named MetLife. So welcome, Gary.
Thank you, TK, for having us.
So obviously we want to make sure that we get to the issue of technology, and particularly, Michele, your experience as chair of the Technology and Innovation Committee for Deutsche Bank. But Gary, I have to tell you, I am fascinated by the fact that you have left this large company and developed this business that's a no-code platform. And I'll repeat that, no code, meaning no fancy coding type of thing. And it's, again, I'm not an expert in technology, but I know from my experiences the size of the departments and the thing for coding and the technical challenges and the challenge of finding people and all that thing. And so you're presenting to business an alternative that I first heard about actually through Goldman Sachs, who I think ended up being one of your investors. But just, I'm just so curious, just share with our audience what Unqork is. And I don't want to take a lot of time, but I want to make sure that people understand it.
I thank you, and thanks again, TK. So Uncork has changed the way software is written within enterprise software. For 20, 30 years since the web's development, it hasn't changed. Costs increase within companies, and the value coming out is unseen. I lived through that. As a Fortune 50 CIO and leader in technology on Wall Street and then MetLife, all I kept seeing was the ambition of the businesses and the ideas they have to drive new value for shareholders and customers, and the limiting factors to get to market with that. And one of the biggest limiting factors is the thing that's hardest to change, it's code. It's every day, as I saw it, businesses are creating legacy right now as we speak, and the newest systems going in are legacy tomorrow, immediately. Supported by millions of lines of code and customization and software products. And at Uncork, I left that world, as you said. So I left the C-suite and the executive world. I had 10,000 developers working for me at one point. Left it to basically say, I know enough how to fix it. And Uncork itself is the first ever enterprise no-code software. What that means is a full software as a service that without ever writing code or needing how to learn how to program code, you could build any application imaginable across every industry. And people who typically would write a document describing what they need could actually take control and build the application at the same scale, reliability, and security that typically the enterprise held dear and said, we need to do it ourselves. As you mentioned, Goldman Sachs, as first a customer, then an investor, really helped us and showed us that even companies where they're excellent at building software, tremendous developers, incredible engineers, they could see tremendous value in empowering those who know what needs to be done to really take control and do it.
Well, it sounds interesting, and I'm just going to be curious and watch what happens
Thank you.
sort of in the world going forward, because it makes all the sense in the world, and now it's the kind of thing that people have to wrap their arms around. Which
Absolutely.
is a great
Yes.
segue, because one of the things that I want to talk about, Michele, first of all, you've lived this world. Okay, you've been at the highest levels in tech, at companies, whether it's CIO or regardless of what you're doing. You also now chair on a very, very sophisticated financial company, the Innovation and Technology Committee for the board. So my question to you, first of all, here comes along this innovation, okay, that's worthy of analysis. First of all, what's the role of the technology committee? And then when something like this innovation comes along, what's the board's role? Are they supposed to be noses in, fingers out? Or is this a time when there's the expertise on the board that you say, hey, we're going to become more involved?
Sure. So, I think there's a couple of roles that the tech committee plays on almost any board that I'm involved with, right? One is, to make sure that the money that is being spent on technology actually gets returns, right? That the value that we are seeking to drive from the investments that we make actually get delivered, right? And obviously the second, and I think, that's much more where you kind of have your fingers out, is to make sure that there's safety and soundness in the way that technology is implemented, right? And that, the company's running effectively. We specifically at Deutsche called it an Innovation and Tech Committee, right? Because we wanted to be able to bring to the supervisory board, right? And also to kind of challenge and help management, right? To think about how you can use technology much more as an innovator for driving alpha and changing the business, and not just to run things the way they are today. And I've kind of been where Gary's been for a while, right? And when I was a CIO, I didn't want to be building things that weren't differentiating to UBS, right? And I feel like what Uncork does is a kind of within one platform has really driven that to the next level, right? It just as one example, what Gary's code does is, standardizes a component for a social security number. Who needs to code that? Right? Yeah. He's got thousands and thousands and thousands of components that people bring together. And so what he's doing is taking that non-differentiating work away from the engineers so they can do important things.
So what do you do though? What does the board do when it's aware of this that's happening and whatever? How involved? I know first of all, we have to acknowledge that every company's different, okay? Yeah. So there's no best practice or whatever, but is this the kind of thing where, because of your depth of knowledge, that you would go to management and say, do you understand this? Would you serve as an educator, at that point? Or what role should the board play from your perspective?
Look, I think the best role the board can play is as a partner in driving innovation, right? We have sophisticated management at Deutsche from a technology perspective who understand what those innovations are. Sometimes they need a way to explain that in more business terms to the rest of their board members. And I think sometimes that's something that we can help with, take the cloud as an example, right? Which to me was one of the most innovative kind of developments in, at least over my lifetime of technology, right? Getting people to understand, other banks use it, exchanges use it, regulators use it. It's kind of an empowerment and a partnership role primarily. And then, in some situations, and, not related to any of the boards that I'm not talking to any specifics on the board, but sometimes you have to give people a nudge as well, right? Yeah. To get their heads out of the day-to-day, because it's very difficult managing these large institutions on a day-to-day basis,
So one of the things that resonates with me, and I almost equate the checking on the value of technology to M&A transactions, because everything seems to happen. Everybody wants to say, but nobody goes back and checks whether this really brought that value. And I think I look at this transaction or expenditure or whatever in a similar way. Everybody wants it to have value, but it gets lost, and nobody comes back and checks, did this bring the value that it did? So I understand that, and I think that's a great point to make. But I think the point here to directors is don't let it pass you by.
Right.
Make sure that you're you're evaluating how these decisions and these expenditures were made. So.
Yeah. I would definitely say, TK, being on both sides, presenting to boards as an executive and then now presenting to boards as a vendor, saying we're going to help you, that value question is the biggest thing we're trying to disrupt in Uncork, is to say, right now every board is measuring for 20 years technology based on only two metrics, on time and on budget. If it's on time and on budget, it's green. That's it. And the reality is, today I got a furniture delivered to my house here in the city. And it's the best example of equating it to that furniture arriving, which is, number one, it came when they said they were going to deliver it and it costs what I expected to pay. It's on time and it's on budget. But did it actually fit in the room? Is it what I expected? Is it what I wanted? Did I get the value from it? Am I going to enjoy it as a consumer and be able to sit on that daybed or that couch and actually enjoy it the way I expect to? Businesses are only measuring on time and on budget, never asking, to your point about, is it valuable? Is it generating the value, the revenue, the cost expense, the takeout, the culture we expect? And it's and that's what we really need to change in the world, is that value question, how to do that.
Yeah.
Drive it forward.
So Gary, do you, I would expect that your initial presentations are not to the board. I would expect that you go in at a different level in the organization, it works up to the CFO, and then it's such a potential game changer that I guess sometimes you're asked to come present to the board. Is that right?
That is true. And in a few cases, the board actually did make the intro. In a few cases, in how I met Michele, the board is actually pushing the change and saying we should explore different ways to do things, which is incredible. We always enter at the executive level. Very different, because we have almost 30 of the largest corporations in the world now as clients. And those 30 corporations, we have the relationship at the CEO, the CIO level, really never below. Because the change we're driving is a fundamental shift and change in how the organization has functioned for 20 years. And you know the way it works. It's almost an antibody coming in. And so we need a top-down push to say, yes, we're going to do this. We continue to see companies that spend $60, $100, $200 million on software, and at the end of the 1 or 2 years, it's not actually working.
Yeah.
And the business looks at it and says it wasn't what we needed, and let's shut it down.
So Michele, we have about 2 minutes left. So, the tech expenditures are such a big nut today. When you look at digital transformation, you look at all the changes that are being made, it's taking a huge part of the budget.
Yes.
Okay, so obviously a tech committee, technology committee of the board is responsible for overseeing that. So from all your experiences at the board level and tech committees, what advice would you give our viewing audience that has that responsibility of overseeing that tech budget and whatever? What advice would you give?
Look, I tell them that the most important thing, as Gary just said, is getting the value for the money that you're spending. These budgets are enormous, and also benefits and business cases change over time. The market changes, the opportunity for the company changes, and you need to make sure that your budget can, move and change so that you're continuing to deliver value, right? And you need to test that value each and every year, right? We have multi-year projects that are going on in many companies, and it's very easy, as Gary said, to get to the end of 2 years, you spend $200 million, what do you have to show for it, right? So I think that, taking it away from this kind of, large esoteric projects that you hope will deliver some major value, is trying to get it to much smaller chunks where you can demonstrate both that value is being delivered, but also that business case is still real, right? The other advice I would really give people is make sure your business people sit on your tech committee, right? They are the most important audience here, right? Because there's a tendency for non-technologists, just as there was, I was always afraid of, the legal discussions, right? Because I'm not a lawyer, I don't understand it.
I'm still afraid of those discussions.
I think that some of the management team and the board members that I deal with, don't really want to get into a big tech discussion because they don't understand technology. My view is you don't need to, right? You just need to think about it as a business decision.
Well, Michelle and Gary, I want to thank you for taking time
Thank
out of
you,
your
TK.
busy schedule. Gary, we'll all be keeping an eye on
Thank you.
what we hear about this no-code platform. Obviously, it's out there, and I'm sure there'll be more publicity on it. So thank you both for taking the time. And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical issue that could help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.